So yesterday, I made a brief video of a lion dance, which was constructed from the shadowed image that appeared on my orange curtains that I danced and set to the music Higher and Higher, an R&B classic re-recorded by Rita Coolidge that became a hit and a top of the charts musical piece. And today I thought that I would frame the context of that particular piece a bit so that maybe newcomers to my YouTube channel or to my work will have a clearer understanding of the meaning of that particular dance and how it intersects and overlaps with other work that I've done. And the way that it relates to other pieces. For example, the way that that particular image and the psychology of recognizing an image in a shape relates to the reading of a piece that I did earlier called The Shape of Clouds Yet to Come. And the description of the shapes of clouds as a creative and imaginative gesture itself relates to this idea of art as experience and art as play. It also relates to cognitive elements in the psychology of perception and the way that we're likely to see and hear and recognize those things which are familiar from our own contexts and unlikely to see and hear and understand and perceive elements that are unfamiliar given our particular context. So, for example, in the year 2000, when scientists had just begun really to seriously talk about the significance of climate change, although an awareness of the destruction of those aspects of our planet that sustain our existence, an awareness of the fact that those life-sustaining aspects of our planet were being destroyed had certainly been part of our environmental culture since Earth Day in 1970, the first Earth Day. So the period between 1970 and 2000, that 30-year period was, I hate to say it, but largely wasted. In the last couple of years, in which we've seen the hottest summers, the hottest global summers on record, it's easier for some of us to experience the perception that we all experience, but in terms of a gestalt, a framework, right, that we can identify as this fact. So sometimes I like to use the expression, I'll perceive it when I believe it. And this piece, in some way, is about that experience, as well as, some of the other contexts in which I've created these lion pieces. And some of those pieces have to do with lion dances, and some of them have to do with the poetry of the roaring lion. And I'll address, as much of that as I can in the reading of yesterday's lion dance, in which the lion was silent, but even in his silence, he expressed himself through the form of this dance, this R&B dance. Now, yesterday, this piece made the national news, which is that students in a town in Arkansas were censored, particularly their yearbook, which had the theme. The yearbook's theme was the Roaring 20s, and of course the roaring brought to my mind, the work that I had done on the roaring lions, which didn't start with, but certainly like intersected with the representation of Michael McClure's recorded reading of poetry to some lions, I believe either at the San Francisco or the Bronx Zoo, probably San Francisco, given his location and the location of City Lights Books. But it may have been on the West Coast, or it may have been on the East Coast. I'm actually not sure. I haven't done that historical work. But my initial critique of the piece began because the famous actor Dennis Hopper had made a statement regarding it, and the statement was that without Michael McClure's poetry, and I assume that he was referring to, in part at least, this famous piece of McClure's, yelling at these caged lions and them angrily roaring back, because that was interpreted by the lions as a gesture of aggression, and the roars that he received back were, of course, the outrage that this small man, particularly small too, compared to a lion, would express this, aggression toward them while they were caged. And whether Michael McClure understood that or not, that was clearly going on in the language of lions. You can hear it. It's fairly obvious. You would have to be a fool not to recognize it. So that gesture and what Hopper said, which was, without Michael McClure's poetry, without the roaring at these lions, the 60s wouldn't have happened. And I took great offense to that particular statement, utterance, because it was clearly so false and lionized this gesture that largely served the purposes of grandiosity and sort of narcissistic, egoistic self-congratulation to a status that it didn't deserve. And it seemed to me that the real lions of the 60s were people like Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis and Muhammad Ali and the individuals involved in AIM and Dennis Banks and people like that, and their lion roar, was often silenced or caged, and the threat of being silenced or caged or shot, and indeed many of these lions were killed. I've done pieces on individuals who hunt lions and kill lions, and my disdain for those individuals is not lost, I'm sure, on my audience. And I hope the symbolism of the lion is also not lost on my audience. So anyway, this particular item from yesterday's news, this is from NPR, on the Roaring Twenties that were silenced by censorship. A superintendent or school board member, decided that this particular timeline that these students had made in this Bigelow High School yearbook should be censored, and these pages were ripped from the yearbook, silencing the roaring lion. That gesture resonated for me. It shouldn't be a surprise, given the work that I've done and the way that I've used lions as symbols of political courage and protest, and that symbolism relates to a discourse in Buddhism, and particularly a magazine in the American Buddhist community called The Lion's Roar, in which that roar is taken as a metaphor, in the same way that I use it as a metaphor. I'm not a Buddhist, as I've stated before, but I've worked with Buddhist imagery for decades, and I certainly consider the Buddha an example of committed and enlightened, fellow traveler. So the metaphor is of the fearlessness and confidence needed to present the profound truths of Dharma. And I guess what I didn't see in Michael McClure's gesture was I didn't see fearlessness, and I saw confidence in, like I said, in a selfish, narcissistic sort of way. I didn't see any profound truths of Dharma. The profound truth of the Dharma was that the lions shouldn't be behind bars in the cage in the first place, and that, if anything, that the piece should have been directed toward freeing the lions, not intimidating them with American poetry. But I didn't see that going on. The fact that a camera crew, was brought, big media brought to record the event, struck me as kind of obnoxious in a further way, and the lack of regard showed to the animals themselves, I found, to be quite, opposite of what Dharma represents to me. Remember that the Buddha fed his flesh to lions. There's a story in the Jakarta Tales in which the Buddha encounters these cubs that have lost their mother, or maybe it's not that they've lost their mother, maybe I'm misremembering it, but they've either lost their mother, maybe she's fallen into the crags of the deep rock, or accidentally slipped, or maybe it's that there hasn't been food, and it's been a hard and lean year, and then maybe if the mother is there and they're merely emaciated and starving, and the Buddha, he sees the hungry lions, and the Dharma, the deep meaning of the Dharma, the profound truths of the Dharma, is that the suffering of these lion cubs for the Buddha was more unbearable than his own death. And so he threw himself into the crags so that his body could become food for these hungry lion cubs, either whose mother had died or whose mother was emaciated as they were, and because of lack of the ability to hunt, and the lack of resources. So this is the meaning of, for me, this is the meaning of the lion's roar. And I've done pieces that in humor, some in humorous ways and some in angry ways, address the importance of that roar, particularly in these times in which, as I've said, neo-fascism is on the rise, censorship is on the rise, anti-democratic sentiments are on the rise, and these pages in this Arkansas yearbook, for me, are precisely a timetable of those who have roared, and of the need to roar, so the timetable itself, the presentation of this particular calendar, this 2020 to 2021 calendar, represents a silent lion's roar, in the way that my dance, yesterday with the curtains, and of course curtains are also a metaphor, right? And the shadow is a metaphor, so all these interactive metaphors. But these roaring pages, again, silenced and justified, because I think one of the supervisors justified the censorship as, well, there was backlash, or there would have been backlash. So, we don't want to disturb anything, so we needed to censor, these pages. And if you look closely at the pages, you'll see, what they represent. And this is what, the anti-critical race theory justification is: we don't need to discuss racial justice in the United States. It's to erase the facts. That's what it's all about. Censorship is the erasure of facts. The fact that people die. The fact that the president attempted a coup following the results of a legal and fair election. And that's all documented here. And the racial injustices are all documented here. And they're just facts of our history in the years 2020 and 2021. And all of this is something that the individuals in education who insist that critical race theory isn't necessary want to rip from our minds and our hearts and our pages of history. And they're just simple facts. They're framed in such a way that these facts clarify the situation of racial inequality in America, and that clarify the growing threat of anti-democratic forces and anti-democratic sentiment in the United States. But they're presented uh, as, almost photographic documentation of these facts, and 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 this particular roar really clarifies to me the stakes of what a roar needs to mean, and what it, and how it can be deployed, and how it can be danced, and why it needs to be danced, and how it becomes silenced. And the great irony for me was that, like this, like important social political justification was censored so quickly, and these high school students, who have no power and and probably very few resources, were able to make these pages and produce this magnificent roar, and how quickly it was censored. And yet, Michael McClure's, multimedia, because it was filmed, right? And then if you consider poetry a kind of media, anyway, this spectacle, clearly a spectacle. And this was when McClure performed his piece, right around the same time that Guy Debord in 1967 was the first publication in the United States of Guy Debord's Society of the Spectacle, and I think it was published in France a few years before that, but by 67, it would have been available in the U.S. in English, and the Situationists, were, like these students in Arkansas, in producing this particular calendar of roars, were the Situationists were very much about critiquing the events and timelines of the spectacularization of cultural product, and that's done in subtle ways, but very compellingly. Like here's an example. This image here of the bitten apple, which of course represents the Macintosh Apple with the $sign on it, very much reminds me of something that could have been a situationist gesture if painted on the right bank, right? And to some extent, it reminds me of my own work and the way that I produce memes and I then stir the waters. But I don't know if I had finished my thought. The irony that this powerfully courageous gesture made by students, without any, presumably very minimal resources, could be censored so quickly, but McClure's sort of white privilege, to go into the zoo and scream at the lions, and only received lionization and praise, right? So I guess drawing upon the beginning of the piece, when I focused on this particular line here, climate change is real, we could say racial injustice is real. And so the backlash against critical race theory is like the denial of climate change, isn't it? Right? in spite of the fact that we've had 2 years of racial terrorism, on the part of the U.S. government, the presidency, Homeland Security, and the media, particularly, media moguls like Rupert Murdoch and Fox News, and also, Forbes is pretty much the same, and so, neo-fascist racial terrorism is real. You could put that, and instead of having a picture of the warming Earth, you could have this picture, created by the silenced lions. And then I'll just say one more thing about this particular article and about this particular moment of censorship. I wanted to praise, presumably there was a teacher, an educator, that became aware of this act of censorship and brought it to the attention of the media. The article is by an individual named Vanessa Romo, and so I wanted to praise her for finding this and making this a national issue, so that the lion's roar, which would have only been heard, right, by those within the range of that particular cage. So the students of this Bigelow High School in Arkansas would have heard this roar in their cage. But now, thanks to Vanessa Romo and whichever educator it was, and I don't know if it clarifies I don't believe it clarifies in the article, but whoever it was who had the insight to make this roar public and to find the media, McClure, he brought the media with him to yell at the lions, but someone here got the Dharma, right, and brought this, made sure that this roar that had been silenced got national coverage and media attention. So this is a dance for the lions.